International Affairs Scrutiny panel.
Jeff Southern, member of the panel.
Deputy Karen Wilson, Vice Chair.
Deputy Max Andrews, panel member.
I'm Ian Gorst, Minister for External Relations. I will shortly be joined by my Assistant Minister, but she's just running over.
George Permain, Director of Financial Crime Strategy.
Julie Keir, Associate Director of Financial Services.
Thomas Wright, Associate Director of Financial Services.
Thank you. So welcome, we appreciate you coming in. Let's, just to give some context, we're doing a review about how people pay for things in Jersey, about accessibility to cash. So that means both whether people can take cash out easily and whether people can spend cash easily in the economy, but also other methods of paying for cash. And it is fairly broad, and it's a subject which is seems to have been of great interest to people generally. So the first thing I want to look at, Minister, is the recent bank branch closures in St Saviour, more recently also in St Brelard. I'm very aware that we are both representatives for constituencies in the west of the island, although they're different constituencies. And so, for example, if we talk about one closure that's happened recently with Lloyds Bank has announced that branch in Red Houses will be closing. It seems to be affecting people on the ground. We've certainly had constituency and panel correspondence about this. What actions are available to government in terms of making sure that we have sufficient banking services in our various communities?
Well, I think we first have to start from the perspective that for a population of 103,000 people, we have more banks and access to more banks than any equivalent population size across the UK and probably across Europe as well. Our challenge is that although as an island we're 103,000, 105,000 people, we still very much live in our parishes and we have our communities. What we've seen elsewhere across the UK and across Europe is that banks have been making decisions based on footfall into branches, and where those footfalls have been reducing, decided that actually it's not a model which they will continue. They'll expect people to go to either larger population centres, which has led in the UK to thinking about banking hubs. So I'm not sure that there's anything that the government can do directly, bearing in mind that we are well served by our banks, and there are access to branches and to cash, which is what government would want to see. We historically have really focused our efforts on making sure that there were access to bank accounts, and we worked in partnership with the Community Savings Bank to make sure that there were access to basic banking accounts. We've spoken to all of the big clearers to make sure that they had basic bank account offerings available, which I think is the opening position of government. We know that in the UK they legislated for basic bank accounts. We didn't need to do that because of the positive engagement that we had from the clearing banks and from the Community Savings Bank to make sure that that was available. So the closing of the branches in St Saviour or St Brelard, we know that that does affect islanders because they have a number of choices before them. They can move to digital banking, or they can come where necessary into town to access the branch banking. But obviously the statistics upon which the decisions in this instance have been made shows that more and more people are moving to digital banking.
Have you been contacted by constituents on this matter with your constituency hat on?
I haven't, but I am aware that some of my fellow deputies have.
Okay. That would be consistent with, I think, what we've had in St Brelard as well. In terms of the banking hubs, what involvement would the government potentially have in setting those up?
Well, firstly, we'd have to ask ourselves if it were necessary. And that's a good question. We know from conversations that we've had with Lloyds Bank that they've gone through quite a thorough process, modelled on the process that's required in the United Kingdom. They themselves have approached Jersey Post to see if they could work in partnership to provide banking services there, which is something that they do in the Isle of Man. So when I was last speaking to Lloyds, I asked, we had a discussion about whether government would itself then go back to Jersey Post to ask that question and see what might be possible in that regard. So we've undertaken to do that.
I don't speak as an expert, but just as a customer of who uses facilities, I've noticed that there have been different approaches by certain different banks. So whilst there's definitely been a move to perhaps modernise and close branches, it's clear that some banks have opted for ATM machines which actually have multi-functionality. We heard from a witness from the UK, in fact, a couple of days ago, that ATMs can either be very simple, which are just to dispense cash, but they can also, some banks have chosen to install machines which you can pay cash into. There are some of those in the high street here, and obviously they can pay cheques and you can do other things with. Do you think, do you have any conversations around that at all from a ministerial level in terms of trying to see how maybe modern, and feel free to bring in officers, of course, about how banks might round or square the circle around modernising, but also providing for those who still want traditional banking services?
Well, we have conversations with banks about all of the services that they provide and the regulatory environment in which they operate, and that Tom leads on that from a official perspective. But of course, you're right, you can get different types of ATM with different functionality, and each institution largely decides what services it wants or needs to provide to its customers in any given location. So we know that in St Brillards, for example, HSBC have said that they remain committed to having a branch in St Brillards, albeit they have got a renovation project going on, so that, as I understand it, that particular branch may indeed be out of action for a period of time. They've been liaising with Lloyds Bank, and Lloyds are considering about when they will actually cease their operation to cover that interregnum period, so that there is services available for islanders at Le Canavay. So my experience is that banks are open to conversations. They are very, very mindful of their customers, and in the case of Lloyds, they've done a lot of had lots of conversations with their customers. They're introducing new services, largely virtual, but where you can have conversations with those virtual employees. And in extremis, they're also happy to go out and visit people in their homes to help with the provision of their banking services.
Can I ask, thanks for that information. Would conversations with banks such as Lloyds be appropriate? Or would the government ever say to Lloyds, for example, we understand that you're closing branches, we don't necessarily want to intervene and we can't intervene in that, even if we wanted to, but could you ask them, for example, to maintain cash machines in certain areas? So if you close that branch, that's fine, but we'd like you to maintain a Lloyds cash machine there, and preferably one that you can, pay money into as well as taking money out of.
They have to find a location, and the owner of the building has to agree to house the machine, and it has to be housed at a time where the bank can get in at frequent intervals to stock it up with cash. And they then have to. So there's an element of commercial.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we lost one of the There used to be one down at the waterfront, it was withdrawn because they couldn't.
I get all that, but this is why when I hear talk of banking hubs, I know that sounds great and there's that in the UK, but that would also require all of that potentially, and it also requires government involvement, which without any judgment, Jersey governments don't tend to like to get involved too much in private business affairs.
No, and I think that's a fair point. My experience is that banks are very mindful of their customers here in Jersey. They may not be able to offer quite all the suite of products that they do elsewhere for the reasons that we know, but they are open to conversations. The conversations that we've had with Lloyds Bank, for example, over the course of the last number of days since they announced this closure, have been very productive, and they are open to conversations, as I say, with Jersey Post. They're open to conversations with partner banks to make sure that services are provided. I mean, what we obviously find is that even the technology available to banking customers is changing. You can deposit a cheque in your bank account without going anywhere near a bank branch or an ATM machine. You just take a photograph and off it goes, and it gets deposited. You need an ATM if you want to withdraw cash. Depositing cash has become more constrained over the last number of years, simply just because it's, I suppose, in some ways, it's the convenience to the banking institution. Having said that, one of the banks that I use, when it comes to depositing coins, it's much more straightforward than it used to be. You simply go in, you press you put the coinage into a machine, it counts it all out for you, you don't have to separate it out, and then it either prints you a receipt or you put in your card number and it deposits it into your account. So there are these changes happening all the time.
Thank you.
And,
Sorry.
go on.
We'll move things on because it's all good information, but we're mindful of time. Just on that last question in this subject, when were you first informed about the closure of Lloyds in St Brelade?
We like to operate with our banking institutions on a no surprises policy. I think I received an email from them when I was away in the States. I was definitely out of the island. They wanted to meet with me and the Chief Minister. They came in to meet with the Chief Minister.
But what was the date?
I don't know what it was. It was a few days before it went public.
Okay, that's
It was
fine.
in advance of it going public.
I just wasn't sure when you were in the States because it could have been more than one occasion.
It could, yeah.
Thank you. Right, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Deputy Wilson. She's got some questions about the state of play in Europe with regard to cash usage.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Minister, would you agree that cash continues to play an important role in society and is indispensable to any economy?
I would say that it plays an important role in society. I'm not sure that it's indispensable because there are many other methods, and if we look back, it's interesting to think that one of the reasons, not just about technology, but was avoiding the difficulties of cash, so either the black market economy or the security around cash. And so people moved over time to using cards and electronic things like that. Now we're realising that that's not straightforward from a security perspective either, and we're seeing more and more difficulties in that regard. My personal view is that there should be a choice, that islanders should have a choice whether to use cash or not. But of course, business institutions make their own decisions for their own reasons about whether they accept cash or not.
Okay, so we understand from evidence that we've had over the last couple of weeks that there is a European position on safeguarding access to cash, and I just wondered if you were aware of what that entails and what implications that would have for the position that we might take here in Jersey.
Well, we, of course, how do we say this politely? We do know that there are, in Europe, cash is used for all sorts of reasons. We we in our society perhaps don't think of and use cash in the same way that it might be used elsewhere, and nor would we want to, because we just wouldn't want to. The latest statistics that that Tom had a look at about European usage of cash wasn't quite what we'd initially looked at earlier when we started looking at some of the earlier reports. So I'm not sure whether Tom or George have got those statistics.
So I can talk.
But there is a decline in the use of cash there as well.
Okay, well, rather than just on the data, if I can, Tom, I just want to press on the way in which Europe, Europe is handling this issue, and what is it that you're learning from the European position, accepting that cash may be used in different ways, that we need to think about here in terms of safeguarding access to cash?
Well, I'm not sure quite what we mean by safeguarding access to cash, because the government position...
to just the European Central Bank, as well as certain countries in which are being more proactive in Europe, have basically said that access to cash, and also to make sure that cash is widely accepted as legal tender throughout Europe, remains common, and some countries are in fact taking the step to legislate to say that all businesses must take cash, which of course is not happening by the Bank of England or the UK. So I think that's the context, and part of the reason they do that is to ensure personal freedoms, I think they say.
So we've got to be careful not to merge issues, because we say the European Central Bank is saying those things about rights to cash. That's all good. We'll absolutely support that. Then saying that the government should legislate to ensure that all businesses accept cash is a different quantum altogether. Cash is legal tender in Jersey. We went and checked the 1950 law, where it says that cash is legal tender. What it doesn't do, of course, is give a fuller explanation of legal tender as you've got in the UK. My personal view is that it wouldn't be right for government to legislate to force businesses to take cash, but I think that's probably the subject of a hearing that you had with the Economic Development Minister.
Yeah, could I just then ask how you would safeguard access to cash?
Well, safeguarding access to cash is ensuring that it remains legal tender and that there is cash available in the community. We, of course, have a situation, and I don't want to tread on the Treasury hearing that you're going to have next week, of a currency fund where we distribute out to banks Jersey cash in exchange for sterling. We've got no intention to change that.
But if you have a situation where you've got businesses making and banks making their own decisions about whether or not to take cash, and what you're communicating is that cash should be in circulation, how will you safeguard that as the Minister for Financial Services?
Well, there's no desire on behalf of government to change the position about cash being legal tender. No bank has said to me that they want to stop the usage of cash. They just want to provide it where it's needed, and they largely do that now through ATMs, and I don't see that position changing. What changes is people's general consumer habits, whereby it is easier all the time. It's easier and easier to use one's card rather than cash.
I mean, I think the point Deputy Wilson was getting at is that there seems, on the one hand, we have lots of people saying customers should have a choice. Cash is legal tender, but what's the point in having cash if you can't spend it? So if we get to the point where if we leave it down to businesses and businesses say, you know what, you go to town and there's not one coffee shop anymore that accepts cash, then clearly the choice is gone. And so what do we do in that situation where most businesses don't take cash anymore? Do we just accept that?
Well, we're not at that point, are we?
But do we need to wait to get to that point?
And I suspect that that's probably more a question for the Economic Development Minister. I've given my view that I don't think it's necessary to
You couldn't answer it
legislate.
either, unfortunately.
Well, it really does fall within his purview about
But do you accept
for
the
businesses. My purview is that banks have cash available.
as a government collective though? Do you accept the position that at some point ministers will have to grapple with a situation where if they say on the one hand cash needs to be continued to be accepted as a mode of payment, that it becomes problematic if businesses just say we're not accepting it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically that of course is right. It becomes problematic because there is ultimately then no choice if nobody accepts cash.
But there is can I add something?
Sorry,
There is
yes, George
there
wants to.
are multiple issues arising with that. I mean, there's been some comment about e-business not taking cash. Now, I'm conscious we're public, but one of the businesses that do not take cash is also one of the businesses that pays the living wage. And I would imagine if you spoke to the business owner, they would say, well, I am able to pay the living wage because I have made efficiencies, and not taking cash is one of the efficiencies that enables me to pay a living wage. Now, if we go in and say to businesses, you must have somebody at a cash desk, they'll then say, can't pay the living wage anymore.
That seems tenuous.
I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think you have to remember there's a cost to doing business. There is a cost to dealing with cash. And I'm aware of businesses that only take cash, not necessarily in Jersey. There are some businesses that express a preference for cash.
Sure.
There are businesses in Jersey that express a preference for cash. There are some that express a preference for cards. There are few that only do one or the other.
Yeah.
But those who only take cards, I imagine, would tell you that is an efficiency that allows them to pay their staff more.
So let's develop that idea. Let's move on a bit. And George, I'm mindful like you might want to come in. But can we move this into the domain of maybe the grey economy and maybe why there are certain businesses that would have a preference for cash? We did put it to the Chamber of Commerce, and I think I'll let you take over in a moment, Max, about the
expert on the...
No, it's because he's been allocated these questions. And
It's an exciting topic there.
Simple process.
Grey economy.
You take this question.
So I've noticed that as well, and I think especially when we started the review, we noticed a few more signs coming up saying this business takes cash and cards, but we prefer cash.
Yeah.
And we put it to the Chamber of Commerce. Can you think of any reasons why a business might prefer to take cash? And they said not really. I think that was what they said pretty much.
But well,
Well,
I
one
could
I've
I
seen
could
says
think of
quite
one.
clearly-
Any legitimate reason?
Yes,
But the
because
one-
sorry, go on.
Sorry,
No, carry on.
I'm just going to say one of the ones I'm thinking of says very clearly, we like cash because we don't have to pay our bank as much money. There is a transaction
Exactly.
card. We would like cash because it's cheaper for
Yeah,
us
that's right.
to take. And they say that. Others just say we want cash. Now that may
But
be
some,
because
say they prefer cash. They prefer cards because they don't get charged. They get charged more for cash.
Yes, well, that is I suppose it depends how much cash.
But it's been suggested to us
What
some
the
people
cash
like cash
handling
because
is.
they don't declare it. It's basically.
Well,
I
that
can
of
comment
course
on
may
that.
be that may be the case in some cases. We are not aware of any businesses in Jersey where that is the case.
They've not told you.
I'm treading onto I'm treading into your department.
Well, let's
Revenue Jersey do their reviews, and they do that.
Yeah.
And we know that the regulator as well has a role to play, and that's George's bit of cash and making sure that there's compliance there. But you might already have an employee that's always done cash and always done your end of day till procedures and all of that. You might want to keep that employee employed. So there's two costs to cash. One is the bank cost and one is the employee time cost. You can outsource that to a card or to SumUp. There are still costs, they're just different costs, and you are letting them do different processes for you.
Max, do you want to ask some more generally about money laundering questions?
Yes, indeed, Chair.
thank you.
Thank you both for being in attendance today and your officers as well. Minister, I'd like to start off by asking you a question in relation to electronic payments. So those payments might be online or, say, via bank apps. And in your capacity as an External Relations Minister, do you believe that it's probably easier to have oversight and enforcement as a regime where there is, say, electronic transactions compared to cash transactions?
It's a good question. I'm going to let George come in now with his points.
So the points I was going to mention earlier, if I take them first, which slightly goes to the Chair's points, is I think the most instructive view on the European side is from the 2022 European Central Bank study. But from that, from what I've read, it shows quite a mixed position across Europe, varying on the use of cash, a lot of which is linked to cultural positions in different countries. But the one thing that I think I took away from looking at that was that the preferred payment methods of companies is still pretty split, with about 25% roughly preferring cash, 25% on credit card, and then you had other means making up about 50%. And it wasn't quite clear to me, and certainly not in any of the research that I've looked at, that we've got to the stage in Europe where legislatures are directly intervening on companies' preferences yet. There's certainly, I think that the Euro system has this cash strategy to keep cash there, but it's not so much got to the intervention stage yet. So I think that the report is very interesting in looking at where the changes are, but I'm not sure it's reached that.
Just on that, is that because they're taking the view of the consumer?
I think generally legislatures around the world tend to look at what commerce is preferring, because that tends to be where legislatures are driven by. I think if there was a problem in terms of accessing services or people being able to conduct their day-to-day business, they intervene. But I don't think we've seen any drastic interactions unless countries identify problems per se. But I do think it's quite interesting. I would say where I think Jersey falls is actually probably a more permissive kind of side of use of cash than maybe we see in the rest of the British family, as the Minister kind of noted in his opening remarks. It certainly is not at the, I think, Slovakia level of 46% of companies preferring the use of cash, but it is certainly not out of line. So I don't think in anything that we've seen, or certainly none of the domestic work we've done on risk, cash has ever come up as a particular concern. And more of the work around the other side, I guess, so away from the risk side, has been on the really, I guess, financial education and bringing people into the formal financial system because of the risks that carrying large amounts of cash can occur to a person. So those have been the focuses, but on neither occasion when we've looked at it has it risen up. But sorry, I wanted just to get that in from the previous questions. But you asked around whether there's a kind of preference for whether physical cash payments versus digital payments, whether it's easier to monitor it. The answer is that in many ways, both things are monitored. So in the regulatory regime, the regulator will look at the amount of cash that's being dealt with by a bank. There is also a view that where we do the national risk assessments, you can see these in our tomes of long national risk assessment documents. One of the levels we look at when we're looking at each sector is the level of cash activity. Okay. So these are all considered regardless of whether it's electronic payments or cash payments. The only way that factors on a risk scenario is that an increased level of cash activity increases the vulnerability of the sector, and you would look for equivalent controls in place to try and mitigate that. So that's the way it's looked at. So there is no, I think, preference, but they are both looked at in both ways, whether it's cash or electronic transfers. Yep. Does that help in terms of
that does indeed. Thank you very much. Minister, obviously we're moving towards a more digitalised world, and I just want to ask you, Minister, about whether you have any concerns with some of the transactions that may be taking place in Jersey as a jurisdiction, due to, for instance, the sophistication of some individuals or potentially entities as well, who may be using Jersey to funnel funds for money laundering purposes, and whether that might not be taking place, for instance, if they had to maybe transact using cash.
That really is another question for George, because that's exactly, these are the sorts of things that we've been focusing on for the last few years. What are the risks that the institutions and the structures that Jersey has here and cross-border flows, how do we mitigate and manage those risks? So I can't really do any more than point you to the Moneyval report. Having said that, of course, we know that money launderers are constantly changing their mode of operation as jurisdictions make changes to ensure that they're not used. They then will be changing their methodology to try and find a different way. So I've got all of the stuff that George is responsible for in all of that compliance with FATF requirements. But on the other hand, I've also got this, which we are seeing more of, which is connected, and the FIU has started to look at this, is all of the bad actors which are trying to get islanders to do things with their digital accounts in a way that we don't want, and there's a whole education piece around that as well. And I think we'd be surprised by just how much of that is happening and how easy it appears to be. And banks themselves are having to address that, put stops on people's accounts more often for unusual payments. Of course, we know that those things happened with cash, but in just a different way. Somebody stood behind your shoulder at the ATM machine and hit you on the head and took the cash off you. So, but they are areas that we continue to think carefully about. I don't know if you want to say anything about the FIU and what they are.
Yes, I think so. So if your focus is their concern around the potential use of businesses to use cash to effectively launder money, the first NRA looked at the risks of tax evasion that Jersey faces, and this would specifically be at the domestic risk of tax evasion. It was not found to have any significant risk. There are, like any economy, there's an element of work that's done to make sure that there is not domestic tax evasion inside Revenue Jersey. But this came out as a low to medium risk on memory of where this was. The reason I think for this is, firstly, if you're looking to launder through the use of cash, you tend to look for two things. One is a kind of quick touch point, high intensity, cash orientated business. It doesn't kind of, the irony is true there, that literally car washes and laundrettes are the common type of business that you would use for this type of scenario. We do not tend to have a large prevalence of those type of businesses in the island. The other route of laundering through cash is trying to gain valuable items for large amounts of cash, and that's a high value dealer regime, which we recognise in the international standards. Now, the way the standards work on that is there's an understand figure of 10,000 euros, basically, and we have had a policy in Jersey for decades that you would have to register as a high value dealer with the JFSC if you were willing to accept 10,000 euros or more in cash for goods. And we have had no registrations for high value dealers for the last 2 or 3 years. I think there was a couple of registrations for a few years of a few jewellers, and a number of, I think, car dealers were registering as well. None of them now have their registration anymore. Right. And the reason is because they are not interested in offering that service, because simply the risks that come with it for them commercially are too high, and they are not finding it's impeding their business or their customers' business in wanting to use it. So there's neither on the value side nor in the kind of high volume side has that ever come up as a significant risk. Yeah. So I wouldn't want to speak either for the Revenue Service, who would look at it separately and is the Minister's portfolio, but in a general view of risk, that's never been a concern that's been raised in the island.
Do we have any more questions on this?
Lots, but not enough time.
Indeed. Jeff, I'm mindful you haven't asked anything, but you... And just the very final question in this section, mindful we'll have the Treasury Minister in. I think we've still got a lot you can tell us and we can ask you. Just from a government point of view, on balance, would it make life a lot easier if Jersey was cashless?
Well, we don't do everything from a government point of view to make life easy, do we? We recognise that we're a diverse community and that we support islanders in that community. I am not a conspiracist, but I do believe that there should be options of cash as well as digital payments available to islanders.
Thank you. We'll leave that section there then. It's been interesting, and if we need to follow up, we can send you some more questions if you're happy with that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right, let's move on to what is effectively our quarterly hearing. Sorry if any of you didn't get to come in, by the way, but we can, as I said, we can follow up as is necessary. Remind me, who is leading on the first section?
I think you are.
Yeah. Okay, I remember now. So, Minister, it's been in the news recently. Thank you to those officers, by the way. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been reported in the local news recently, but there was also the wider context to it in, I think, the national media about post-Brexit ETAs and passports are being required. So, first of all, for British people travelling to Europe, we're going to need a visa waiver, which has a cost attached to it. But we heard last night, certainly I heard on the news, that some in the tourism industry are concerned about the impact that the ETA might have on visitors from Europe. First of all, do you share those concerns? Do you understand those concerns?
Obviously there's two systems coming in. There's the European system,
Yeah.
Whereby we will need to, in effect, follow a similar process to the one that one has to when one is visiting on a holiday to go to the States. So that is, you fill the form in online, you make payment online, and then when you enter the country for the first time, you have to have they take the biometrics, so the photographs, fingerprints and that sort of thing. We've known for a number of months that the EU is working on that, and the UK obviously is working on a similar but no doubt different scheme for European citizens coming into the United Kingdom. It is a subject matter that I have spoken on a number of occasions to my French colleagues about. I last raised it in Paris with the Europe Minister prior to the election, and it is something that I've raised with the ambassador in London and with regional contacts as well. So that engagement is ongoing. As we sit here, it is expected that might be delayed slightly because the technology and processes are not quite where they had expected them to be for a start in October. We continue to engage and we continue to make the case that when that comes in, there's got to be sufficient resource at all of the ports of entry into the EU. So for us going into St Malo, there's got to be sufficient resource there to allow us to enter as easily as we possibly can. The challenge, of course, in the other direction is that in this intervening period, we've had the French day visitor carve out almost, which has said that because we can really count people in and out again in the same day, we're not saying that you need to have your passport, we're saying you can come on your ID card. We are, as I sit here, I can't say whether that will continue or not. Yeah. That really is the purview of the Home Affairs Minister.
So it said on the...
But I've continued to have conversations with her.
The indication was that it's valid for... there's a deal for 2 years, is that right? On the card, it's been...
Well, that's the current carve out,
yeah.
As I understand it, for up to 2 years.
Yeah.
It's very likely, because that's just the way these systems work, that the new border system will very probably take longer than we expect. The important question for us to which there isn't yet an answer, is will we be able to continue doing that when there is the new border system in place as well? And that's something that we continue to have conversations about.
So that's right. So constitutionally, we know that, I think it's for the weekend now, isn't it? We accept visitors for up to the weekend, or up to 2 days. Doesn't have to, but at any rate, I suppose that is the question. To what extent do you think that Jersey could break away and not have to follow that system if it desired?
Well, we've shown that we can act responsibly and not be a soft entry point into the UK with the current ID card system. That's all positive because it shows a track record that we wouldn't then be a soft entry point. We will need to continue to make the case that we could continue to manage that within the new system as well. The other side of the balance is being in the customs area. We don't want to impinge or cause difficulties there. So these things are, they're delicate, but we need to keep making the case.
I suppose the question is, and do we have any clout? Do we have a best alternative to negotiation in that process? Or are we just going to get ignored like we were over the initial decision to go into Europe or not to?
I'm not sure where you
To leave
think.
Europe, maybe.
Well, we weren't ignored, were we? We didn't have we weren't. It would have been democratically inappropriate for us to vote, and then let's say we had a vote, we'd have been 100,000 people against the 60 million in the UK voting. So
I suppose the question is, we understand the European position that they're saying, okay, UK is no longer in Europe, therefore we're going to have to treat you like you're not in Europe, which is reasonable. But the question of whether the UK had to reciprocate, I suppose, is a different one. And were the interests of Jersey and perhaps the other Crown dependencies taken into account when those conversations were going on about the new scheme?
Well, it's difficult for me to answer that directly, other than we were having those conversations and we were making our view known, and that scheme's not yet in place. We remind ourselves of that, making known our desire to see French visitors continue to be able to come on the carve-out with the ID scheme.
Yeah.
Those are ongoing conversations.
And could that be reciprocal? Could we also say to France, given the fact Jersey is geographically and culturally very closely linked to you, would you consider a similar situation for our residents?
Well, we could make the case, but it's not a French competency, it's an EU competency, so you'd be looking EU-wide, and experience would tell us that they would simply say no.
Because they think we're part of Britain or UK.
No, because they don't do carve. They don't.
Don't do carve-out.
It's the European way. It's the European way.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on.
Thank you. Minister, I just want to talk about the charities law amendments that are being proposed that aim to extend the definition of misconduct to provide the Charity Commissioner with greater powers to exclude governors of charities on safeguarding grounds. So we understand that these have been issued for amendment. Is it intended to be a relatively narrow amendment regarding the exclusion of governors of charities on safeguarding grounds, or are other amendments anticipated also? Other elements.
What we've tried to do is just pick out the things that the Charity Commissioner has suggested, which are straightforward, and get them brought through. And this will simply give the Charity Commissioner greater powers to exclude. I hope it's straightforward. I've not yet seen the draft, but it is basically based on recommendations of the Charity Commissioner himself. Julie, I don't know if you want to
no,
add anything.
I think other than to add that the instructions are actually being provided by SPPP as opposed to our team, so they've got greater sort of oversight as to the detail on it.
Okay. Have there been any cases in which the Charity Commissioner has required the additional powers over and above what is proposed at all?
Not that he has, you mean, have there been, yeah, I'm not aware that there have, but I think it's generally, as the experience of the Commissioner is coming up to, it's been 10 years since this law has been in place, I think he probably would look back and think, actually, perhaps we should have excluded A or B, and he just wants to strengthen his powers to be able to do that.
Okay, just on that point, will there be any further consultation or any views sought on that amendment at all?
It will go through our normal processes, so it will, as Julie says, officials in SPPP are doing that instruction. That will come to me then to send the instruction to the law drafters. What normally happens with charity consultations is that we will consult with charities directly and use the forums that are available there. And the Commissioner normally would be involved in that. We'll just have to think whether that's appropriate in regard to additional powers for the Commissioner.
Yeah, okay. Do you have an anticipated time frame for producing or debating or implementing these amendments?
I don't in front of me.
No. Is it possible to give the public some indication at some point when this is likely?
It's a question I can take away and I can provide to the panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Wilson. Minister, can I turn, if we finish with that line of questioning?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Can I turn the attention to what's going on in the Middle East? So we've got some questions about Gaza. So start off with perhaps one relatively recent development is that the UK on the 2nd of September made a decision to suspend arms exports licences to Israel for use in military operations in Gaza, following a review of Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law. Do you have any comments on that initially?
I really want to get drawn into UK foreign policy.
I can make it more relevant, I suppose.
They act on our behalf. We continue to support, as the state said, a ceasefire and the return of the hostages, and we support the UK in seeking to deliver that.
So given that the UK decision, I know you're not responsible for it, it differs from the US position for a start. Both of them are allies normally, but the UK did face some, I understand, criticism from the US counterparts. In terms of that decision, could I ask whether or not we can be sure that whether Jersey has any financial structures or vehicles that might be used to fund or to fund arms to Israel, or be involved in any of the profits from sales regarding arms that are sold to Israel for use in Gaza?
Well, as your question started about the licences that were being withdrawn, that means that less will be being sold. So if licences have been withdrawn, and if there were any nexus in Jersey, then that would have been stopped because those licences would have been withdrawn.
That would be UK companies selling UK production for sale in Israel, but there might be other countries and other companies based in other countries that sell arms to Gaza and who put their profits in Jersey. Do we know whether that would occur?
we're not aware of that. I'm not sure how it could, with our structures and our regulation, actually occur.
No.
I don't think it could.
Okay. And would there be any wider consideration in the Jersey context if UK sanctions towards Israel were to increase? Would that be something that you would monitor?
They would automatically have enforcement in Jersey.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's go back to the question of the states debate that we had in, I think it was in February, the end of February or thereabouts, about the ceasefire where a decision was made, ultimately amended. We know that subsequent to the debate there was a UN special report that came out in March, the end of March, which found that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. That came out, as I said, after you put an amendment in to remove the wording to talk about, which would have talked about a potential genocide. Do you think it was the correct decision in hindsight to for the states to remove that wording?
I stand by the amendments, but equally at the same time I support the UK in seeking to deliver a ceasefire and return the hostages, and we're going to continue to see various resolutions and positions taken by other allies and the UN throughout this conflict, and the answer is for a ceasefire to be delivered as quickly as possible.
And as the External Relations Minister, do you accept the findings of the UN, both that what is happening in Gaza by Israel does appear to constitute genocide, and also, well, we'll start with that question first of all.
Well, you're asking me to make a commentary on something which is not within my purview. What I have done since the new government was formed is speak to the Ministry of Justice Minister responsible for liaison between ourselves and the UK government, and discussed the debate and our desire to see a ceasefire and the return of the hostages in the terms of the debate, and I've since that conversation followed up with a letter sending again the terms of what was agreed in the States.
Okay. But does the government that you're part of here in Jersey have confidence in the UN court and the rulings of it?
Well, the government that I'm part of isn't part of the United Nations because we're not a sovereign state.
Okay. That's not what I'm asking.
The sovereign state is the UK, and as far as I'm aware, the UK has confidence in the UN.
But do you have any reason not to have confidence in the rulings of the UN
I have
court?
no confidence not to have I have no reason not to have confidence in the United Nations.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think we'll leave that area there then, apart from perhaps to, let's move on. That may well be a focus for some question time in the States. But do we have any other questions from the panel on that? No? Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn the attention now to a bit more closer to home. So again, looking towards Europe, towards France and the Brussels office, as well as the Beyond. Jeff, you come in as you want to, but I'll start to lead on that. So, Minister, in April, in our hearing earlier this year, we discussed some elements of the European relations following Brexit more generally. Have there been any developments around the common policy for external relations regarding European relations, notwithstanding what we've talked about with passports already?
So the common policy has remained as is from the I'm just trying to recall now whether where we are with that particular process, but it is remaining as it is, which is to engage with our neighbours in Europe, both at a regional, capital level and at an EU level. As I indicated earlier, I've had engagement since we last talked with ministers in Paris. The Minister for Sustainable Economic Development has had engagement in Paris with the parliamentary group there. He's had engagement regionally on a number of occasions. We've had engagement in London with the embassy. Officials continue to have engagement through the hot desk in the British Embassy in Paris, and officials continue to have engagement across all of the range of perm reps in the EU as well.
Okay, thank you. And can you talk to us a bit about the Channel Islands Brussels office and outline what the top priorities will be for that office into 2025, please? And anyone can answer that question.
No, I've actually got them written out here somewhere, so you've got them. Which page?
I mean, if there is, you can give us a brief outline, but if there's more
I want to
information you can hand over.
You've asked me a very specific, so rather than me waffling, I'll read them out to you.
Thank you.
So, raising the profile of the island across Brussels and the European Union, matters of taxation, matters of financial services, matters of financial crime, matters of data protection, and more broadly matters of engagement with the new European Parliament and Commission. They are their priorities for the remainder of this year, and I expect they will remain into the following year as well.
So some of these questions could also apply to other entities like the London office or to even the Beyond, I suppose, which we'll come on to in a moment. When you talk about raising the island's profile, obviously an element of that is obviously to do with Jersey's finance industry, which is important for the economy of the island. But is there a more abstract way in which you raise the profile of Jersey in perhaps in its other forms? And if so, what does that entail?
Yes, there is, and that's engagement with other countries of the United Kingdom, and its engagements with other small states, and those engagements cover all sorts of things from language to art to education, and I've got to say that they're incredibly successful. We don't have Bex on the hearing, unfortunately, but I know that Tom can say a little bit more about that engagement and how successful it is.
I'm happy to. And just good afternoon. First time for me to speak anyway. So cultural diplomacy is, I think, a growth area for our Channel Islands Brussels office. We're by no means alone in doing that. I think lots of jurisdictions do it, but I think Jersey has a particularly rich cultural offering. I mean, I would say that I'm biased, but I'm very open in being biased about that. So some recent examples, we've had a collaborative event on minority language regeneration. I know that may be something that you would be particularly interested in, Deputy. There's an event that's going to be held very soon with Norway, with the Basque Country, with Wales. We've got the participation of Jersey poets in Trans Posati, which is a poetry festival which coincides with the European Day of Linguistic Diversity. We're supported, I should say, by Arts House Jersey in some of that activity, but I think it's very valuable. It's always hard to measure soft power and cultural diplomacy, but I think providing opportunities for people who can showcase Jersey's unique cultural heritage in Brussels is a good thing. And it speaks to our broader visibility and sense of island identity overseas.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose on that subject, can I ask about whether you think, first of all, do you think there's value in not just governmental outreach in this area, but maybe could you talk about the roles that you feel, I'm going to use the acronyms, but I apologise to the members of the public, the parliamentary bodies like the BIPA, CPA and the APF, which are non-governmental and parliamentary, are those useful tools as well for cultural diplomacy and for what the work that Jersey's doing in this area?
From my perspective, they are very useful. We know that in parliaments, people move between parliamentary positions to governmental positions to parliamentary positions. But it's back to the cultural diplomacy is about understanding that we're not just financial services, we are so much more than that. Financial services is just what we do in our economy, but that's not the whole of who we are. And all of those bodies where it can bring people together and have engagement on those wider shared issues, actually. I find that most challenges that Jersey faces are faced elsewhere. It's just a matter of scale, and therefore engaging on those matters and showing that we've got something to say. Sometimes we've got something to learn, and sometimes we've got experiences to share which are valuable to others.
Can I just ask on that? And yesterday we heard from the Minister for International Development about 3 areas of focus that they have around what you could argue are related to island identity and the promotion of dairy, sustainable agriculture and finance to empowering communities. Where do you see the synergies or the distinct differences between how you would operate as an external relations department and that of an international development department?
Well, we firstly remind ourselves that Jersey is in one of those unique positions. I'm sure there are others that do it, but we do it, and we are extremely clear in the way that the governance process works, that our aid is just aid, and it's not connected to trade or diplomacy in any way, shape or form, and there are no strings attached. That money is given to an independent board of commissioners, and they distribute it alongside their criteria to most vulnerable communities around the globe, and that's how it should be. And I would not want and do not want any insinuation or suggestion that they are connected. They are not connected. Now, sometimes we are operating in the same countries, as you would expect, because some of the other things that we're doing in Jersey, because we are in effect facilitating global flows around the world through financial services, you would expect us then to be engaging with those countries on a governmental level where those flows are either going to or coming from, and that's a lot of what Tom's work is through the global relations portfolio, when signing or seeking to sign agreements, etc., with them. I personally pay particular compliment to Jersey Overseas Aid Commission for those 3 themes. I think they were inspired because what they did was ensure that aid went to the most vulnerable, but also picked up on the culture, history and skill of Jersey in the themes that they were picking, so that islanders themselves felt that they had affinity with the programmes that were happening with Jersey taxpayers' monies around the globe.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to look at the office of the Bureau des Îles Anglo-Normandes, which sounds a bit like something you'd find in Bergerac, doesn't it? Well, that's the Bureau des Îles Étrangères.
Joe, you'll find it. It'll
We might find it in Bergerac.
Yeah, you might do.
You're a bit late, Chair. We should have suggested it earlier.
Yeah, indeed. I'm surprised some ministers didn't get some extra roles in that. Yeah.
Well, as far as they might have done, as far as I'm aware, I don't know.
Yeah. But we probably shouldn't talk about Bergerac today, necessarily. As far as the Beyond is concerned, can you tell us, does the Beyond differ slightly in terms of its focus from the other international offices that we may have? And similarly, can you outline the priorities for it for the next year?
The reason it differs is only in that it is much more regionally focused, whereas the London office is obviously parliamentary and government focused in the UK. SIBO is commission focused, it's in the centre of that political organisation, whereas Beyond is largely regionally focused, but it does complement the hot desk that's now in Paris, which different officials attend to. The idea there is that you will have that link then between the region and Paris, and you'll have people in both places. You'll know that they recently opened a hot desk in St Malo. That was suggested by Brittany officials when they were over here earlier in the year, that, okay, you've got the office in Normandy, so we can provide you with a desk in St Malo and in Brittany as well. So they continue to promote Jersey and the islands' identity. It's an important conduit for the sharing of information between Normandy, Brittany and Jersey, but they're also focusing on supporting energy and climate. Fisheries remains important, customs and migration, we just talked about that as well. And emergency cooperation is something that's been important in the past and continues to play an important part in their role. They also support the annual summits. There'll be another annual summit in October in Mont Saint-Michel later this year. They support the work of the MOU and make sure that there's good communications between ourselves and Normandy and Britain.
Thank you. Have you got any questions in this area?
It was just interesting. Yesterday we had a visit in in St Clement, the mayor of Concar. One of the issues that he raised was, and again I think it might be for the Home Affairs, but you know, he was very committed to the twinning arrangements, and I just wondered what role external relations played in that kind of sort of external relations work, if any, or is there anything that you could comment upon there in terms of your views of twinning and how important they are?
It's a very good question, and that was we pay thanks to the former Connitab Norman for the work in creating that what was at that stage, and I think still is, a unique twinning relationship with Brittany rather than Normandy. And I know it's been in abeyance during the COVID period, but I was really delighted to see it and to see that trip, and we're grateful to him for that. It is a good question because it's something that probably I don't think we have made the most of. It's one of the tasks that I've given to, not this Assistant Minister, the other Assistant Minister, to work with the twinning committees to see if there's support that we from a governmental perspective can offer, and if there's if ministers or assistant ministers are wanted on those committees or on those trips and those visits to answer questions, to support those visits, then we stand ready to do that. But that will be something new, but we think that there's real value in there that we're not really as an island making the most of. That's not to say that they are parish twinning committees. That's exactly how they should remain, but we want to be able to offer support where relevant.
Thank you.
Can I come in on that? So I think that I have a follow-up question, which is, the good thing about these hearings is you can't get told by the bailiff that you're straying too far from the subject matter. And we can also speak directly, I guess, with that. through the chair, of course, which is what I always do in these meetings.
Well, you are the chair.
Indeed. Something I've noticed is that, and something I've appreciated from external relations, is whenever we're given the heads up, say from, with my other hat on, to do with the APF, and I know that earlier on in the year there was a colloque that went on about young business leaders from Britain and France. And it's really useful if, for example, I think the committee really appreciate being informed of that. Could we ensure that in the future that there is maybe an automatic checklist, if you like, to make sure that if there are things that you're doing and if there are things maybe that we're doing, that there is relevant and appropriate correspondence on that? That's the first question, which I hope is a yes. And if that is the case, I'm fully aware that there needs to be a proper separation between government and parliamentary processes, and also the twinning. I think that's also relevant. But where there are synergies, is that something that you're happy to make sure that we do get involved in appropriately, or at least have knowledge of?
It is. Sometimes these things happen rather quickly and develop a momentum. They young leaders, for example, I think was 5 weeks between the idea inception and the actual visit. And as we were going through that, we said, "Oh, just a minute, we've got a dinner. We need to invite da 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 da." So us getting that into a pro forma, so it's automatically invitations are made and engagement is involved, is something that we will take forward and do, and we have been doing for others as well. Of course, there is a separation between government and parliamentary processes, but I'm a firm believer in that we are a small island. There aren't that many of us, so we should work together on these opportunities and in this task, and I have no problem at all in doing that. I think, when we had the Liberation Day commemoration event in the Speaker's House, we invited the chair of the local CPA. I think we were able to invite at least one member of the panel, and we want to carry on doing that. And if we forget, please do remind us, because it's not on purpose, it's just somewhere the box has not quite been ticked.
Thank you. No, we appreciate that, and it's not often, it's not a case of being invited for the sake of it. It's just so that we know what's going on, and we can, if there's any relevant synergies that we can make either separately or together, that's useful. Thank you. But the last part, just in case there's anyone still listening online, this might see them off. So I'm going to ask you about limited partnerships, the last part of the section. I don't think we've done that yet.
Sure.
And if any of you need to come back in, feel free.
Should be.
Yeah,
Right,
we've covered a lot of ground
partnerships,
today,
so
surprisingly. Can I just say you've done also well on a Friday afternoon after what's no doubt been a long week, both the panel and the ministerial team. So with regard to limited partnerships, the panel understands that law drafting instructions have been issued for the amendment to limited partnerships. Again, is this intended to be a relatively narrow amendment, and can you talk to it briefly, please, Minister?
Yes, it is, and I think it's really around insolvency. But Julie, I'll let you, or Tom, I don't know which of you want to take it.
It's me that's got that one, so thank you. It's just to clarify and deduplicate terms that have sort of ended up in the legislation that shouldn't perhaps editorially have ended up in the legislation. So it's a tidying up exercise more than anything, really, for consistency, and also to just make sure that our legislation is in line with those of other jurisdictions, and then we're not differing in any way in terms of our use of terminology.
Okay.
So it does all centre around the definition of insolvency in our own legislation, and just making sure it's mapped across properly.
Okay, so is it a matter of housekeeping, could we say?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So noting that the amendment seeks to address the uncertainty of procedural complexity, was the need for the amending the law raised by the industry or the JFC or someone else? Was it picked up in-house? How did you become aware of the...
I think it was probably picked up as people thinking of using and creating limited partnerships and seeing that, in practice, what will this mean if we do this?
Yeah.
And therefore suggesting.
Yeah, I may be able to add to a bit of colour is that the amendments were originally made in 2022. And in the process of the consultation, the various drafts there, the word insolvency appeared at the final version when it shouldn't have done, and we've had to go back and basically unpick it, and nobody's entirely sure how the word insolvency came to be placed in there, but we have unpicked it with industry to make sure that we are correct in writing it as it should really be written and was intended to have been written in the first place.
That's fine. And does the definition of insolvency differ in Jersey to elsewhere?
Yes,
Is that the
it is,
issue?
Yeah, it's a black and white text.
I feel like the assistant minister wants to talk to us now.
There is a definition
But
in
not
the
from this role, from the
interpretation
former role.
Former role,
but
yeah,
bankrupt,
yeah.
yes. there's a
You're allowed to
definition.
use any knowledge you've got if it's helpful.
The Interpretation Act has a definition of bankrupt,
Yeah.
which relates principally to Jersey procedures, but I think it does include insolvency procedures elsewhere from memory.
Do we still use the term en disaster, or is that something else?
We do, yes. It's still the title of law, and someone is still technically en disaster bankrupt. But I think when I was there, if you are dealing with people who are not in Jersey, we would tend to say bankrupt.
It does sound very much more theatrical to say en disaster,
It's
doesn't
more en
it?
disaster, and I think it's a question of people understanding what it means.
Yeah.
And although it is, so Jersey is different in that a company can be en disaster in Jersey,
Yeah.
but bankruptcy in the UK does not apply to companies. There are different procedures for a company. So there are some, and then you've got things like dégrèvement and cession de bien, voluntary, involuntary.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's the same in your house as it is in mine, Chair, that the term en disaster is still used.
It is, but thankfully we've not had to use it yet. So normally en disaster means if I've left the cooking on and not turned it off, and then there's a different type of disaster maybe. That's another story. So thank you. What's the anticipated time frame for the debate for that amendment, and is it coming up soon?
Yeah, we're hoping to launch it in the next couple of weeks. We've just had the human rights review done on it, and we're hoping to get the editorial version of the legislation shortly so that we can launch.
Good, thank you. Any questions on this area? No.
No.
So all that talk of en disaster and dégrèvement, I suppose, leads me to slightly, hopefully not whimsical end to the afternoon, but to ask, I suppose, about, to tie this in with the fact that we've got these offices in Europe. To what extent do you think Europe values the fact that Jersey isn't just an English-speaking island, and do you think they understand fully the differences? And in that regard, do you think that the use of different languages within the Assembly and within government and within wider Jersey society is something that is valued externally and internally at the moment? From an external relations point of view.
That's a very big question to which there is.
Do you mean valued or understood?
Well, I suppose, first of all, is there a value to, if we look across government, and I know I'm taking this in a slightly different direction, but I
Is there a value to others understanding that we have a Jersey French? And
that's
that
part of
we're
what I'm
interested
asking,
in
yes.
Languages, and that's part of our culture. Yes, there absolutely is. And officers in Brussels in particular, actually, obviously in Beyond they sort of know this, but Brussels in particular, those conversations about languages and the commonality of those jurisdictions which have minority languages or even don't, is an opening conversation which is unknown until those conversations start, and having us there at those events and being part of those events and taking part in them is, I think, invaluable part of the diplomacy work that they do in Brussels.
And in terms of, I know that if one works for government organisations in Europe, there's usually a requirement of fluency or knowledge of at least 2 working languages of the EU. Is in terms of your department, I know not everyone is facing that way, but do you have quite a high number of multilinguals, and where would they be deployed?
Interestingly, of course, in Beyond, both employees speak French and English. The individual that largely covers the hot desk in Paris is also bilingual, maybe even trilingual. The officers in SIBO currently, they're probably all bilingual. Some of them might be even more, have even more languages, I think, so 3 or 4, some of them.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something that you value as a department?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any further questions?
Sorry, Tom, did you want to say something as well?
Just also more corporately as a department, we've also supported members of the staff with their language training, not just within the European context. We have a member of staff who is fluent in Mandarin and Cantonese, and we've supported that as part of corporate learning and development. So yes, I think we are very much committed to officers maintaining or developing language skills, particularly where that's very relevant to their roles.
Yeah, can I just ask you, how do you develop your external relations workforce in relation to the activities that the External Relations Department is involved in?
Do you say that one? Well, it's a good question because we have we've recently put some time and effort into developing a competency framework. This sounds like a bit of a kind of technical answer, but a set of behaviours and characteristics for all of the grades in the department. We've drawn on not just the Government of Jersey kind of core behaviours framework, but we've also recognised there are some skills that are a bit more specific and bespoke to working in an international context. And so we looked at what the UK Foreign Office has done to take, if you like, the UK civil service framework and then adapt it to add in those bits that are more relevant to working in a more international context or working overseas. So that's a new product that we've got internally. And then that maps on to, well, what if you know what the behaviours and skills that you need to develop in order to progress, what's the right learning and development and training offer that supports that. So external relations is still a relatively new department. It's certainly a small department in the context of other Jersey departments. But we are, I think, making progress to put the right resources in place to support that work. We have a corporate away day that's actually coming up, hosted here in Jersey in October. I think that's important, where you have a team that's split across multiple jurisdictions. I think we all found through the COVID period that there isn't a substitute to face-to-face for some aspects of team building. And so we make an effort once a year to bring the team back so that they can all be in the same place, because actually it's quite easy to just carry on with the business as usual and find that you don't have those moments to come back for corporate training. So that's part of some of what we do. We also identify certain roles where there's a language requirement or it's very strongly encouraged. So our Europe-facing roles, French is a particularly important skill for lots of those jobs.
Thank
you. And can we ask, have you got anything that you want to say finally or to ask us? Or, no?
No, thank you.
So Minister and your team, can I say thank you once again for coming to see us? We appreciate that. We're going to stop the filming.